Welcome back to Bloomberg's Bottom Line. Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner said today that China needs to strengthen its, quote, substantially undervalued yuan because it puts other countries at a competitive disadvantage. Jamie Metzl, the executive vice president of the Asia Society, says both China and the U.S. need to make some changes. Jamie's also a former deputy staff director and senior counselor at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He joins me now on set with more. Jamie, welcome back to Bottom Line. Always good to have you on.
Always great to be here.
What type of changes do they need to make?
Well, big changes. There are three big areas that Secretary Geithner mentioned that are both really big. One is to level the playing field for U.S. investors and U.S. industries operating in China. There are big issues involved with that. Market access, government procurement policies in China. That's one big deal. Second, huge intellectual property theft. There are enormous levels of intellectual property.
Does that discussion get lost in the discussion about the currency?
Well, these are all of a piece. The intellectual property theft is a much bigger issue for us than currency. Currency is a huge issue. But IPR theft, there are some estimates of up to $300 billion in losses to the United States alone as a result of Chinese IPR theft. China has been making noises about addressing this issue, but the majority of Chinese government agencies are using illegal versions of American-created software from Microsoft and other companies. It's a big deal. The estimates are about 80% of the software being used in China is pirated. And then the third issue, as you correctly mentioned, is currency. Somewhere between 20 and 40% undervalued. There have been small incremental moves over these last 6 months that amount to about 3%, but that's really not enough.
Jamie, as we mentioned, Treasury Secretary Geithner spoke today ahead of next week's state visit by Chinese President Jintao, and he was talking about specifically what's going on between the U.S. and their yuan being undervalued.
Right.
Let's listen to what Secretary Geithner had to say, and then we'll get your comments on that.
If China does not allow the currency to appreciate more rapidly, it will run the risk of seeing domestic inflation accelerate, as you are already seeing, and will face greater risk of a damaging rise in asset prices, both of which will threaten future growth.
Jamie, when you and I talked last year, when you came on, you said that one of the things that the Chinese would do was they would look out for their own national interest. So if there's going to be something where they have to deal with their currency, they will deal with it in their time and not because they feel their hand has been forced by the United States. Is that still the order of the day?
Well, what I said last time is that they're going to say we're just going to make this decision on our own, but they are susceptible for pressure. There's a lot that they need from us. They need to have market access to let their economy continue to grow. They are responding to the pressure that we and others are putting on them regarding the currency. But right now they're caught in a bind because on one hand their economy is still dependent on exports for continued growth. And for that they need a weak currency. At the same time they are experiencing increasingly high levels of inflation, which is devastating. If you're some poor Chinese, and the majority of Chinese are still poor, and the food prices especially are rising rapidly. It's about 5.1% inflation. That's a big problem for you. So how do they address inflation? They've tried to raise interest rates. That hasn't worked. They have increased bank reserve requirements. That hasn't worked. The one thing that could work would be currency appreciation, but they're caught between these two goals.
So, Jamie, do enough people understand that inflationary pressures in China will have a ripple effect around the world?
I think people do, but those inflationary pressures are counteracted by the low level of the Chinese currency. So certainly, if there is 5%, 10% inflation in China, those prices are going to show up in Walmart and elsewhere. But at the same time, when you say if there's an item that's worth $2 at Walmart, let's say a quarter to a third of that is the Chinese production cost. So if 5 or 10% of that quarter or 2/3 of 50 cents to 60 cents goes up, it won't be enormous.
As I mentioned, Chinese President Jintao will be in Washington Wednesday for a state visit. How do you avoid it being just a photo op? Is anything substantive going to come out of this? And is alleged currency manipulation at the top of the list for the Obama administration.
Yeah. So it has to be more than a photo op. In 2009, President Obama went to Beijing. The trip was a total disaster. It was because it was a photo op, and frankly, it was a bad photo op for us, and we didn't there weren't any real deliverables. I think a lot of people recognize that if this is just a photo op and a kumbaya moment for Presidents Hu and Obama, that's going to be a failure. There have to be specific deliverables for this to be a success. Certainly, the RMB evaluation will be one issue, but I don't think that's going to be at the top of the list. Nuclear proliferation is a huge issue. Issues of Iran, North Korea are going to be talked about. And then within the economic basket of issues, currency is one, but certainly the level playing field and intellectual property protections are also important.
And I would imagine quickly that the U.S. might be pressuring China to help with North Korea as part of those six-party talks. Maybe there'll be some reciprocity because of Chinese help?
There could be, and North Korea over the last few weeks has begun to come back from the brink, and you have to assume that China has played some kind of role in facilitating that that process. But what we really need to see is a shift of global responsibility. It shouldn't be just the United States that's worried about nuclear proliferation in Asia. I mean, certainly if that happens, it's going to hurt us, but it's also going to hurt China. And China is emerging so rapidly and so massively on the world stage that they need to begin to step up as a global player more than they've done in the past.
All right, Jamie Metzl of the Asia Society joining us here on set today. Jamie, always good to see you. Thanks so much for coming in.
Anytime.
I appreciate it.